At the height of his stardom, Dan Blocker has all that most performers seek for their entire careers: respect, stability, music, and a role that provided him a sense of permanence. That's why the finale was so unexpected. There was a sense that things would soon return to normal. There was no build-up that felt risky, no moment that shouted doom ahead. They never did. Music. What happened next was abrupt, distressing, and left a stillness that became louder over time. It's possible that Dolphia Blocker became the public face of grief. She went with something extremely uncommon, vanishing, instead. Music. Their last chapter became one of music, Hollywood's quietest tragedies due to her refusal to be involved in the story. A giant uprooted from suffering. Little Joe may be charming, humorous, and beautiful, but Hoss was the one who really won people over. The Cartwright brother was huge, timid, a touch naive, but immensely adorable. He was irresistible not only because of his puppy dog charm but also because of his tenderness, innocence, and humility. And the individual who represented him exuded the same enthusiasm. Dan Blocker was already gigantic when he came into our planet. He was born in Dalb, Texas, on December 10, 1928, music, and weighed an amazing 14 pounds. He still holds the record for the biggest baby born in Bowie County. In a way, his life started out as a story that people felt obliged to tell, and that theme continued all the way through. His parents, Ora Shack Blocker and Mary Arizona Blocker, moved the family to O'Donnell, a tiny town about 40 miles south of Leech, when he was a small child. After losing everything during the Great Depression, Shack, who had previously been a farmer, managed to save enough cash to start a grocery store. Dan often delivered goods to customers' cars, doing his best to help the family, who lived in rooms behind the store. Shack used to joke with his mates that since Dan was so enormous, he should pay them to hire him because he was damaging anything in the store. Nobody at the moment understood that his size would eventually prove to be his biggest advantage. O'Donnell was a little village of roughly 800 people, encircled by vast ranch land. The main event took place on Saturday nights, and strangely, Dan was typically the performer. Dan would be waiting, word went out, for anyone who chose to try their strength. A stretch of Main Street would be roped off, and he would challenge anyone who dared to stand up. He never lost a battle, Blocker said. He understood exactly what he could do, and even as a teenager, he weighed around 275 pounds, give or take. He was so sure of his strength that he even declared that if he had a few months to prepare and reduce a few pounds, he could fight Floyd Patterson, the heavyweight champion. It was more than merely chatting. He enrolled in the Texas Military Institute at the age of 13 and joined the football team as a linebacker. A scholarship to Sull, music, Ross State University, where he expected to study English and continue playing football, was awarded to him because of his remarkable achievement. He was 6 feet 3 inches and weighed close to 300 pounds by the time he was 18. And as the years passed, he would get even larger. But all was altered by a turn of events. The theatrical club at school required a strong person to lift big dummy props for an arsenic and old lace show. Dan was ideal for the position. He was then offered a small part as Teddy Brewster, the crazy nephew from the play Murderous Ants. His life transformed in that one moment on stage. The intensity, the audience's response, and the sense of being noticed captivated him. He never looked back after switching from English to theater as his major. He rejected offers to play professional football after graduating from music and moved east to pursue a passion he wasn't even aware he possessed. Before landing a modest role on Broadway in King Lear, he toiled in summer stock, repertory theater, and music, gradually honing his craft. Though it would go a different route than he had anticipated, it was the beginning of something greater. Dan Blocker was drafted into the U.S. Army in late 1950 in the midst of the Korean War. Music. After completing basic training at Fort Polk, Louisiana, he trained for 9 months at Sapporo, Japan. He then joined the 45th Infantry Division's Company FN Battalion 179th Infantry Regiment in Korea. He attained the rank of sergeant by the end of his service. His regiment was based in the present-day North Korean region of Chwon, close to the Jamestown line. They found themselves dragged into fierce combat at Outpost Erie in March. Then, on May 25, their patrol was directly confronted by a communist ambush located far behind enemy lines. The Americans decided to fight after being hemmed down and outnumbered. Blocker, music, retaliated against machine guns, mortars, and small weapons while remaining in his position for over 4 hours after one soldier was injured and trapped under intense fire. Even if the injured soldier did not live, his deeds, music, kept the enemy at bay. It was not the end of the fighting. His squad fought at Erie, Old Baldy, and Porkchop Hill from the middle of June until the end of the month before defending Hill 223. Finally, in July, the division was withdrawn from the front lines after 209 consecutive days. Due to combat injuries, Blocker, who had been serving as first sergeant, had to be admitted to the hospital. After being brought home in August 1952, he was recognized with saving the lives of other members of his unit. Sergeant Blocker was later regarded with great esteem by Gordon, music, APTs, one of the men who served under him. Strong, athletic, boisterous in a good way, amiable with everyone, and a born leader, he said. Blocker could smash a beer can between 2 fingers, according to APTs, and yet find time to watch out for every soldier in his command. Dan and Dolia Parker were married in the same year. After being married and feeling more responsible, he went back to school and graduated with a master's degree in dramatic arts. Shortly after, he accepted a position teaching high school English and drama in Sonora, Texas, with twin daughters Deborah Lee and Dana Lynn, as well as sons David and Dirk, to support his expanding family. He went on to teach 6th grade in New Mexico. Every stride he took moved him a bit more to the west, music, gently leading him in the direction of the life he was always destined to, music, lead. Dan Blocker, the most misunderstood celebrity in Hollywood, approached married life with the same steadiness that he used to everything else. He genuinely appreciated sharing his love of acting and language with children, loved being a teacher, and loves being among children. Without realizing it, he may have impacted some people's lives along the road. Everyone who knew him seemed to concur on one point. Dan's heart was enormous. He was often irritable, but he was also quick to say sorry and, music, own up to his mistakes. He didn't relocate his family to California in order to pursue celebrity or attract attention. It was a straightforward and realistic idea. Dan enrolled at UCLA to pursue a PhD in dramatic arts, continuing to teach during his studies. Although he still liked acting, it wasn't yet the main focus of his life. That started to alter in the middle of the 1950s when he began trying out for TV parts in order to supplement his income. He was a perfect fit because of his size and presence, and westerns were popular at the time, music. After landing one tiny role after another, he gradually gained expertise in front of the camera. When Peter Sears backed out of playing Major T.J. King Kong around this time, Stanley Kubrick even attempted to replace him in Dr. Strangelove. However, Blocker's agent rejected the script, and Slim Pickens was ultimately cast in the role. It was one of those lost opportunities that only make sense when looking back. As the Goon, credited under the name Don Blocker, Blocker Maiden. Appearance in the 1957 Three Stooges short Outer Space Jitters. He appeared in a Sheriff of Cochise episode that year as a bartender. A click was made. Slipping into several roles while returning on stage made him realize how much he loved performing. The work then began to come in steadily. In well-known programs like Gunsmoke, The Rifleman, Have Gun Will Travel, and Maverick, he even had the opportunity to showcase his innate comedic timing. After making a debut on Walt Disney's Zorro in 1958, he was given a permanent part in the short-lived Cimarron City series. The short runtime of the show likely felt like yet another blow at the moment. In actuality, though, it was the break he wasn't aware he needed. After it was cancelled, he was able to assume the part that would come to define his life. Everything changed when he was selected by producer David Dort to play Hoss Cartwright on Bonanza. Dan abandoned his doctoral studies to pursue acting full-time, mostly because the job required all of his abilities. It was also worthwhile. Hoss was the show's heartbeat, emotional core, and unwavering soul that kept the music Cartwright family together, if Little Joe was its main character. The fact that Bonanza wasn't an immediate hit is surprising. Ratings were so poor when it debuted that NBC thought about ending it after just one season. The fact that it had to compete with Perry Mason during its Saturday night time slot was one of the issues. The show didn't even make it into the music top 30 in its first year. However, the network accepted it. They rescheduled Bonanza for Sunday evenings at 9 p.m. Then everything at last made sense. The show's popularity increased, its ratings skyrocketed, and it started the lengthy run that would ultimately last for 13 more seasons. Season 2's ratings saw a significant boost when Chevrolet joined as a sponsor. Nevertheless, due in large part to the high cost of production, the show almost vanished before it had a chance to be successful. The show had gone over budget, and the New York network had intended to terminate it after the first 13 episodes, as NBC executive Thomas Sarnoff later disclosed. In the first year, it cost roughly $15,000 per episode to film Bonanza in color, which was a significant sum at the time. Sarnoff intervened, promising to keep the production within budget, and he succeeded in doing so. With Dan Blocker's Hoss at its core, Bonanza survived and went on to become one of the most cherished television series in history. Something clicked with America the instant they encountered Hoss Cartwright on Bonanza. This tall, 6 feet 4 inches man weighed well than 300 pounds and appeared to have stepped out of a legend. Yet rather than being a terrifying savage, Hoss was polite, humorous, uncomfortable, and wonderfully gentle. He stammered as he said he got into mischief. When he showed his heart, the audience fell in love with him immediately away. The fit was perfect, and the name Hoss was a playful pun on the term horse, which is slang for big as a horse. The deal-breaker, though, was Dan Blocker's complete immersion in the role. Millions of fans did not perceive Hoss Cartwright to be a character. He felt like a human being. The major contradiction begins there. Because Dan Blocker was not at all like the lethargic, ignorant ranch hand he played in real life. With a master's degree in theater, he was highly well-educated. Before his acting career took off, he was a schoolteacher. In addition to being politically progressive, he was well-read, fiercely pious as a Free Methodist, and smart. He promoted leftist causes, notably Eugene McCarthy. A clever, reflective, and curious man worked behind the scenes. However, Blocker and Hoss share one extremely crucial thing in common despite their differences: an intense sensation of empathy. Blocker was a fervent supporter of justice, love, and music, advocating for morality. All that he contributed to Hoss was quietly impacted by his belief. Kids, music, felt it immediately away. Parents also did well. Hoss, music, never appeared crafty or manipulative. There was nothing hidden about him. What you saw is exactly what you got. A fine man doing his best in a complicated situation. Blocker battled the amount to which he was becoming engrossed in the part early in Bonanza's run. He later confessed that in the early seasons, he frequently assumed he and Hoss were the same person. He spent so much time creating the persona, studying him, and trying to understand his ideas that the lines began to blur. It wasn't until the 5th season that Blocker felt secure enough to cut ties with Hoss. He could, music, take on the part of Hoss every morning and leave him behind on the soundstage every night once he had a clear comprehension of who he was. Nevertheless, Hoss continued to reside within him. Hoss Cartwright's emotional core was shaped by this idea, which often reminded Blocker of a quote from 18th century Quaker missionary Stephen Greeley: "If there is any kindness to be shown or any good to be done, it should be done now. We only come this way once." That simple idea was the foundation of all good deeds, clumsy confessions, and acts of devotion. Off-camera, Blocker's resilience showed in surprising ways. He cracked his clavicle when he was flung hard from a horse during one filming session. He did an almost unimaginable thing instead of going to the hospital. He himself set the bone. After that, he got back up and continued the scene. It wasn't until later that he took time off to recover. Ironically, he put on a little weight during his recuperation, and when he returned to set, music, the same horse that had thrown him could no longer carry him. It exemplified Blocker's quiet grit brilliantly. He had been decorated for his duty in the Korean War, although he did not discuss it much. He was profoundly transformed by battle, notably with regard to weaponry. Despite the fact that Bonanza was built around shootouts, outlaws, and frontier justice, Blocker actually loathed guns and publicly said that, although he was compelled to carry one on television, he had no desire to deal with them in real life. One dreadful night in Korea, while sitting on a hillside, he realized how powerless a person becomes when another person is in possession of a pistol. This insight led him to despise weapons. Any illusion of invincibility he had was crushed in that instant. He liked to hunt before the war. After the conflict, he was without a gun. He prevented his sons from going hunting at all. It didn't make sense to restrict her by shooting animals for sport. He considered that calling it sport was misleading until animals could be trained to shoot back. He took a firm, methodical, and incredibly intimate stance. This created an intriguing contrast. Hoss periodically reached for his holster on screen. The individual portraying him detested utilizing violence as a cure off-screen. Music. On the Bonanza set, Blocker encountered a true family, something uncommon in Hollywood. Michael Landon and Lauren Green got particularly close to him. Even though Landon was still young, he already had strong opinions about storytelling, character direction, and the direction of the program in the early days of the series, when I was really attempting to identify this character. He may be uncompromising. He might quarrel with network executives and producers. He was rough on some people. Blocker, however, observed another thing. Passion. Over time, Landon's deep emotional connection to the show and its characters contributed to the development of Bonanza. The performers chose to socialize outside of work, even though they spent a lot of time together, often from early in the morning until late at night, 5 days a week. Because of their excellent bond, Blocker was best man at Michael Landon and Lynn Noy's wedding. Blocker did make appearances in a few movies, notably Music, Come Blow Your Horn and Lady in Cement, both starring Frank Sinatra, despite Bonanza taking up much of his schedule. Nevertheless, Hoss was his legacy and television was his home. Despite his celebrity, Blocker never lost sight of his roots. When was the last time you visited Texas, boy? A month or so ago, I was in Dallas, I see. Oh, that was just now. Yes. His hometown of O'Donnell, Texas, Music, continued to welcome him as their own even after he transferred his parents to California so they could be nearer to him. The recollection of the quiet, hard-working boy who was typically holding a book made those back home smile. They found it nearly unbelievable to witness the same child riding across the Ponderosa every Sunday night and smile into millions of living rooms. At last, Dan Blocker took a unique action. He developed a character that looked ageless. Hoss Cartwright was more than a comrade. He was more than simply a comedy. In a world full of chaos, he stood for politeness, music. Beneath that insignia was a man who chose gentleness despite his real belief in compassion and recognition of grief. The famous person hated being well known. By the middle of the 1960s, Dan Blocker had achieved something that most performers can only imagine. His admirers loved him. His fellow performers held him in great regard. When they saw Hoss Cartwright, they saw someone they aspired to be like. In an almost poetic turn of events, however, Blocker himself had no desire in becoming famous. He was an actor. He loves to perform. The craft was his passion. He did not like to be recognized. Blocker and his husband, Dia Parker, choose to live in silence. While other celebrities were purchasing luxurious homes in Beverly Hills or throwing costly parties, the Blockers settled for a modest 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom property in Northridge, a tranquil hamlet roughly 20 miles from Paramount Studios. It was snug, helpful, and very different from Hollywood's glamour. For Dan Blocker, acting was a career. He wasn't attempting to become well-known through music. He had no goal of becoming a famous personality. He was working to support his family and follow his own passion. He felt the immense attention that came with playing Hoss to be weird, almost uncomfortable. He often looked truly bewildered that a fictional cowboy he played on TV could affect millions of people in such a significant way. This uneasiness only grew as Bonanza's popularity soared. Strangers would stop him in public. Others would seize his arm. Others would give him unsolicited hugs. A lot of people sought autographs. Most of them meant well. But Blocker found it challenging to be physically close all the time. He did not like being touched by strangers. He was a huge advocate of privacy. He respected, music, privacy. Furthermore, once privacy is lost, it is almost impossible to get it back. The hardest part of music was how his fame damaged his family life. Dan truly wanted Blocker and Parker's 4 kids to feel normal as they grew up. Yet even something as easy as taking the kids out for ice cream has the potential to become a public spectacle. Every age group would gather. Youngsters would gaze. Parents were pointing. They would interrupt conversations. His hopes of spending quiet time with his family will eventually evaporate. He knew that he was being admired, but he did not enjoy the consequences. Music, nevertheless, despite his rigorous schedule, Blocker never gave up on his desire of being a father. He was, music, at home, as you could expect, a big guy with a huge sense of humor. He was roughly 260 pounds, and he exploited his stature to play about rather than to intimidate. After a demanding day on filming, he would dash through the main door and jokingly push past his sons to be the first person at their electric racetrack. That was ridiculous. It was childish and all Dan Blocker. His ludicrous obsession with racing toy cars revealed something basic about him. Beneath his enormous voice and towering frame was a man who never lost his sense of humor. Music, a man who understood the value of comedy and knew when to take things seriously. That equilibrium was depicted in the Blocker home. Yes, they had a swimming pool. Yes, there were some nice cars in their driveway. Parker drove a 1963 Cadillac. Dan was the driver of a brand new Corvette Stingray. It wasn't about flaunting, though. Hollywood opulence was absent, as were marble statuary and gold-plated gates. It was owned by a family. Dan's social circle was maybe the most revealing of all the information. Blocker kept close to the persons who knew him before he became famous, rather than associating himself with well-known performers and powerful figures in the industry. His professors and old Texas friends regarded him as a thoughtful, learned young man long before America recognized him as Hoss Cartwright. He and Parker avoided attending large-scale Hollywood events. To put it simply, they weren't meant for that scene. They weren't reaching out to the relevant people or developing relationships. They favored known pals, deep discussions, and peaceful music evenings. Although Dan Blocker's notoriety changed how people saw him, it didn't change who he was. Instead of attempting to blend in with the celebrity lifestyle, he simply quit doing music. The Highlands are devoid of secret mansions and walled communities. He moved abroad and packed up his possessions. Blocker took the daring option to move his family to Lugano, Switzerland. Music, the idea was not sparked by a business deal or a tax scheme. The beginning was a magazine, something simple and a little poetic. Blocker was an avid reader of National Geographic, and one particular article about the lake regions of northern Italy and southern Switzerland stopped him cold. Deep down, he was touched by page after page of old European villages, rivers, and mountains. He had previously taken his wife, Dolia Parker, to Europe once. And he, music, informed her that they had to see that lake location if they ever went back after seeing those photographs. Years later, they did so. In 1970, the Blocker family traveled throughout Switzerland and northern Italy, stopping at places like Lake Co, Lake Major, and finally Lugano. At some point throughout the trip, something clicked. Lugano seemed correct, in addition to being attractive. Blocker would later claim that it was the most breathtaking place he had ever seen. Music was, above all, a feeling of familiarity. Blocker had been longing for something in the town. Be calm. Music, just tranquil streets, mountain air, and a slower pace of life, no crowds, no autograph hunters, no people clutching his arm in stores. The practical elements quickly came together. The family decided on an American school in Lugano for the children. Every child began learning a new language. Because neighboring countries were only a short train ride away, Europe suddenly became their expanding backyard. The ruling was rendered in 1970. The Blockers were starting a new chapter in Switzerland. In the US, Blockers were still obligated by their obligations. Naturally, he continued to remain loyal to Bonanza, which was one of the most popular television programs ever. But he had an easy plan. He would go back to Switzerland to be with his family anytime he wasn't actively filming. The move was hardly an escape for him. It had to do with conservation. Almost instantly, there were rumors. Some believed that he left America due to financial difficulties. Some offered forecasts about taxes, money, music, or secret deals. Blocker dismissed it all in silence. He was already a millionaire because of Bonanza. In practice, living overseas meant paying extra taxes and coping with the complications of dual citizenship. He made no less money, if anything, in Switzerland. Money was never the main concern. What truly drew him in was the quiet, the alone, and the chance to walk down the street like any other man. Additionally, there was a small, almost humorous detail that fit him. Swiss television only aired Bonanza in German. Because so few people in southern Switzerland, where Italian was the primary language, watched the show, Dan Blocker was not Hoss Cartwright in Lugano. He, music, was only Dan. The privacy was priceless. Like another Western star, James Arnes from Gunsmoke, Blocker had never been comfortable in the limelight. He did not like premieres. He didn't pursue news articles. He had no desire to become well-known in Hollywood. He wanted a life, a real one. It he found in Lugano. He could focus on his responsibilities as a spouse, parent, and individual. Without the constant interruption of cameras and press, he could observe his children grow. He could sit in a cafe and not be harassed. He was breathing. It was a world away from the dusty roads of the Ponderosa Ranch and the lights and sound stages of the studio. That distance was important because millions of people saw Dan Blocker every Sunday night as a towering cowboy, even though he was subtly taking on a whole new identity. Not as a star or an icon, but as a husband who loved his wife, a father who wanted his kids to be normal, and a thoughtful gentleman who just wanted a little peace and quiet in a beautiful part of the globe. That was from Switzerland. Furthermore, Dan Blocker cherished his calm existence more than any level of popularity. The sad demise of Dan Blocker and his bride. In 1972, Dan Blocker returned to the United States to begin filming the last season of Bonanza. Music, but there was a problem. It was visible to everyone around him. Blocker was weak and depleted and really tired. The big man who had seemed unbreakable was no longer as energetic as usual. He went to the hospital out of concern, where the physicians found that he needed to have his gallbladder removed. The real procedure was accepted as the norm. A cholecystectomy has been and still is one of the most common procedures performed in America. Millions of people pass through it each year. There was no need to worry that something would go wrong. Blocker had faced considerably more severe circumstances during his life, such as fighting in Korea. In contrast, this appeared possible. The process looked to go without a hitch. After that, Blocker believed he was finally free of the gallstone torment that had afflicted him for years. For the first time in a long time, he felt relieved. Expecting to return to work and resume the season, he was sent home to heal. Then everything changed a few hours later. Blocker felt lightheaded. It was causing him great pain. Dolia, his wife, was frightened and rushed him back to the hospital. He vanished from sight. Later that day, Dan Blocker died from a pulmonary embolism. A blood clot had reached his lungs and obstructed a major artery. It was a horrible, unexpected, and abrupt death. He was alive once, making plans for the future. With the next song, he disappeared. Dan Blocker was just 43 years old. The shock immediately spread. His wife's spouse passed away. 4 kids lost their dad. Music, the cast of Bonanza lost a brother. Michael Landon and Lauren Green, 2 of his closest friends, were heartbroken. Millions of fans throughout the world struggled to comprehend how someone who appeared to be so steady and musical, lasting could vanish out of nowhere. After Dan Blocker's tragic death, Dia found himself at a crossroads in both his work and personal life. She may still have been famous. She was able to conduct interviews. She had the opportunity to use her husband's notoriety as a springboard. She didn't decide anything. Rather, Dia walked out of the spotlight totally. Her goals were raising their kids, keeping their privacy safe, and preserving Dan's memory. She never got married again. She never made an effort to draw attention to herself. She never made an effort to change the past. She led a peaceful, meaningful life, just as she and Dan had always desired. Much of what is known about Dia's later years is still unknown because of her intense media avoidance. It was just the way she wanted it. Peace was more important to her than the general welfare. She eventually passed away peacefully as well, leaving behind children and grandchildren who carried on the values she and Dan had maintained.